All right, so yeah, to begin, any questions about what's going on in the class, our assignments, the upcoming book report? Has everybody found the book to be okay to get through so far?
Mr. Earl, I can't hear you that well.
Can you hear me better now?
Yes, a little bit. It's a little better.
Thanks. So yeah, I mean, just a couple things about the book. One thing, I think she does try to approach the undergraduate kind of audience with it. So although it's very kind of theoretical in nature, she kind of brings it down to a level where you don't have to understand a sociological theory to understand her arguments. So I think she does a good job of kind of using, non-jargon related language. So, a first year sociology student can get just as much out of it as, a third year sociology student. So I like the book for our class for that reason. And also, kind of keep in mind what I do in terms of organizing my lectures. Rather than providing you summaries chapter by chapter, I basically try to talk about the book in reference to the report. So how I kind of organize lecture by lecture basically mirrors in one way or another what I'm asking you to do for the book report. And I'll be doing that for Leroux, but also for our next two books later in the semester. So anything else I can address before I get into kind of the first way she gets into supporting the thesis? So again, feel free to speak up. Feel free to chat. All right, so let me get into it. So the overall thesis, we can say, is her basically saying that I came into my research, looking for the influence of class, looking for the influence of race on parenting styles. So the focus was twofold. How do race and parenting, or race and social class shape parenting styles? And then she wanted to look at how those parenting styles contribute to class reproduction. And as I mentioned before, class reproduction is simply the idea that people are more likely than not to stay in the class they're born into. If you're born into the working class, you're likely to stay there. If you're born into the upper class, odds are you're going to stay there. So mobility does exist. You can move upward or downward in class, but it's rare. And the exceptions, are mobility, and the pattern is the class reproduction. So that's what she was getting at. How do parenting styles get influenced by class and race? How do they contribute to inequality? And then we said basically she finds in her research that class matters more than race. So race does influence parenting in some ways for some families more than others. And we'll get into that as well. And she talks about those things, within the chapters. But overall, she finds that class matters more than race. And the best way to recognize this is to understand that you can look at African American families and white families who share a class background, whether it be working class families or upper class families. They typically parent in similar ways. So although they don't share a racial category, they still parent in the same ways. And that's because they share the class background. Likewise, if you look at two families of the same race and they're from different parenting back or different class backgrounds, you see the different parenting styles. So again, what's causing the differences? It's not race, it's social class. So that's what she gets into for the thesis. The main argument, being put forth throughout the book. And then she supports her thesis by looking at three different aspects of how class shapes parenting styles. The first aspect, the organization and the daily life. So basically, on a day-to-day basis, how does the family kind of organize the kids' experience? And then she gets into language use within the family and how families interact with their kids' institutions. So, one, two, and three are the three ways she supports her thesis. Connection one, connection two, connection three is what I'm asking you to really unpack in that middle part of the paper. And so, here, the first connection we're looking at is how class ties into the organization of daily life for the kids. And so I say, you always want to be mindful of the different families being talked about in the chapters. So, two things going on here. The first thing is, although the chapter concentrates primarily on one family and one kid, the parenting style for the method, whether it be the CC method or the NG method, that can be generalized to other families. So, you see, for example, Tyreek and Katie, different chapters, but a lot of the parenting styles overlap because they're both the NG parenting styles. Compared to if you look at Garrett and other CC kids throughout the book, again, typically you see similar types of parenting going on because you can generalize Garrett's chapter to other CC chapters as well. So that's one thing, but the other thing is you want to keep in mind the kid's class background and the kid's racial category as well. So what we see here, we have Garrett, white, middle class; Tyreek, black, working class; Katie, white, poor. So again, if race mattered more, you should see more similarities between Katie and Garrett, but it doesn't because class matters more. That's why Tyreek and Katie have more in common when it comes to parenting compared to Garrett. So what I do here is basically the same thing I do in the next two sections as well. So when we look at language use, when we look at how families interact with their kids, we're going to be breaking it down in the same way, basically creating two categories and kind of creating those categories based upon the different characteristics of parenting. So here you see the characteristics of parenting in the daily life aspect. You see the kid's schedule, the kid's playtime, spaces with adults, and then you see family ties. So 4 characteristics, and then we kind of show the differences of parenting when it comes to each. And so we'll do the same thing when it gets to language use. And so with language use, we'll be breaking it down by different characteristics. And finally, the last part of the book, we'll be doing that as well. So, it's not only to recognize the differences, but why those differences exist. And so that's what I do kind of in the last part of the lectures is, get into, the class-based resources that create these differences of parenting. So in other words, the kid having a very structured schedule versus the kid having a very open schedule on a day-to-day basis, that doesn't happen by chance. Basically it happens due to class-based resources. And so it's kind of jumping around a little bit. If you get to the first part here, money as a class-based resource. If you have the money to enroll your kid in all these activities, then you can do so. Garrett's schedule can be as full as it is because they can afford, all the costs that come with it, the fees, the equipment cost, the transportation cost. And when you can't afford all those costs, then often, the kid, doesn't play anything, or the kid chooses, one activity to do. You can be in the band, but that's the only thing you can do. You can play this sport, but you can't play any other ones. So there's kind of the class acting as a resource that kind of shapes one style of parenting versus another. So does that make sense? How we can look at both kind of parenting styles in reference to each other, but also recognize kind of why those parenting styles are different. So any questions about that? All right, so basically we can look at the playtime. So when playtime is formal, basically we mean that the kid typically has somebody telling you what to do and how to do it. Usually it's an instructor, it's a coach, it's a teacher, basically kind of telling you what to do, when to start, when to stop. And then in the informal playtime, the kids basically are in control of their own activity. They can start and stop when they want to. They can do something new. They can quit doing something. So, the idea is, they're in control. Their playtime is very informal. Nobody directing them what to do. And so again, kind of recognizing these differences, we can go back to kind of money as a resource. When you're enrolled in a lot of activities, that means you're going to have somebody telling you kind of what to do and how to do it. Thus, you're going to have a lot of formal playtime compared to when you're not enrolled in a lot of activities. Your schedule is more open than structured. Then again, you're going to have a lot of informal playtime on your hands. So again, we can break that down even further to the spaces with adults. If you're in all these activities, you're going to have those coaches there. You're going to have those instructors there. So you're going to be sharing spaces with adults in the same spheres. And when you're kind of outside of those activities, typically you find yourself with your peers, people around the same age as you, or sometimes you just find yourself with your siblings, or sometimes you're just alone. And so the last part we can look at family ties. And in comparison, you see that the CC kids typically have weaker ties to their family, especially their extended family, compared to stronger ties in the NG families. And again, we can recognize how, if the kid's schedule is very full, that leaves little time to spend with family, extended family members. On the other hand, if you have the resources to pay for a nanny, if you have the resources to pay for babysitters, then you don't have to rely on family members to do those things for you. Yet, when you don't have those resources to pay for a nanny, for a babysitter, so on and so on, then typically what you do is you rely on your family members to help you get by, to make sure your kid's looked after, your kid can get from place A to place B when needed. So again, kind of not having the money to pay other people to do it. Typically, people from a working class, lower class background reach out to their family. And then that creates stronger ties, stronger bonds among family members when you're kind of hanging out together, when you're with each other, more so than not. So again, we start to see how class kind of starts to shape these different parenting styles. It's not by chance, it's nothing natural. It's something that's created by class background differences. So, getting into that middle part of the paper, basically that's what I'm asking you to do. So that first connection, looking at the daily life organization, you show how the class position of the families kind of shape one style of parenting versus the other. That's kind of the first part. And then the last part of the middle part of your paper, I ask you to explain basically, why this is. Why does class matter? And that's why you kind of get into, you need the money to enroll in the activities. You need the money to, pay for the babysitters, the nannies. So that's kind of that class factor that explains the differences I want you to highlight in that part of the paper. And so overall, we can get into kind of the class reproduction part as well. What is it about the parenting styles that helps the kids stay in the same classes? The middle class kids stay in the middle class, the working class kids stay in the working class. So here Lareau highlights that these parenting styles have consequences for the kids and the different skills that the kids acquire through the parenting practices. So the CC kids kind of overall start to acquire what we call institutional skills. Skills such as being organized, being a good team player, being comfortable around authority figures, comfortable around non-family members. All these comforts and skills are very compatible with the world of institutions, specifically looking at the institution of education and the institution of work. And we're looking at those institutions specifically because those are the two institutions you want to do well in if you want to be part of the middle, if you want to be part of the upper class. So, basically, if you want to find that good job that pays you enough to be part of those classes, you need to succeed in school, get good grades, score well on the exams, get good letters of recommendation from faculty members. And then, you want to thrive in the work environment, kind of climb the ladder. And so to do so, you need to be organized. You need to manage your time wisely. You need to work well with others. And so again, all these skills are very compatible with how institutions operate, with how institutions kind of ask certain things out of the workers, out of the students. Now, the NG kids also get skills, but the skills that they acquire more so are what we call survival skills. So not being enrolled in all these activities, you don't get the same organization skills as the CC kids do. But because you're kind of out on your own, you start to be creative. You start to, make up your own games, make up your own kind of free time. And that promotes creativity. And creativity is a good skill to have, but compared to being organized, they don't weigh the same when it comes to doing well at work and doing well at school. So of the two, you want to have both. But if you had to pick one, the organization skills are worth more in the institutional environment. And so it's the same kind of pattern, being independent, being autonomous is good. And so is being a good team player. So ideally you want your kid to do, be both independent, but also a good team player. But again, of the two, which one is more valuable when it comes to succeeding at school, succeeding at work? It's those teamwork skills. In school, especially kind of the higher levels you get, the more you're kind of working in team-based groups, team-based research groups. In graduate school, most of the work is done collectively as well. And then, the work environment, again, typically, you're working with others, you're on projects. So, you want to show that you can be a team player. You want to show that you can be a good leader of others. And that teamwork skill pays off in those settings. But again, going back to kind of surviving, being able to navigate working class, lower class life, where you encounter, more difficulties when it comes to poverty, when it comes to crime. Being independent, being creative is very valuable. So you have to learn how to make more with less. You have to recognize that you can't always, hire other people to do it for you. You have to do it yourself. So again, these two skills, maybe not as valuable in the institutional setting, are very valuable in the kind of lower class, working class settings. So again, positive skills to have, but the CC kids are at an advantage when it comes to succeeding at school and at work compared to the NG kids, because they kind of have a head start. They are fostering these skills from a young age. So when they enter school, it's not from the same starting point, but they're ahead of the game because they have these skills that help them thrive. And in comparison, the NG kids are lacking the skills. So the NG kids have a lot of work to do simply to catch up. And that's why the CC kids are at an advantage to reproduce their class position by succeeding in those environments. And when the CC kids are succeeding more so than the NG kids, by default, the NG kids will probably reproduce their working class, their lower class positions. So again, I know it's a lot to kind of take in, but basically that's how the thesis operates. That's how she's supporting her thesis, by looking at the different connections in the book. So now let me kind of turn it back over to you. Do you guys have any thoughts or any questions so far? Well, overall, that's what I wanted to accomplish with today's live session. Is kind of give you, a little bit, extra when it comes to kind of breaking down the book and how it relates to the report. And basically, the same thing I do with this, I apply to the next two sections, the language use and the families interacting with their kids' institutions. So, we'll look at the different part of the book, and then I'll break it down in terms of the different characteristics of that section and how, one parenting style typically is one way and the other one is typically different. And then we'll talk about why that difference exists when it comes to class-based resources. Money was a big factor in this part of the book, but so is time. So even if you could afford to, have your kid in all these activities, if you don't have a lot of free time on your hands, if you're a single parent or if you're a working class family, both individuals working, then again, lacking that time as a resource, you're going to have your kid enrolled in fewer activities compared to otherwise. So we kind of move away from money in the next two sections and talk more about time, lifestyle, and kind of an overall adult experience, and also education being a factor as well. So basically, that's what we'll be doing for each part of the book and talking about why class matters and how it ties into class reproduction as a whole. So now I'll kind of, leave that there. So feel free to, leave the session if you like to. If you want to hang out, I will, stop recording now, but I can answer kind of any more kind of individual questions about the class or about the book itself.